Good evening. Welcome to this virtual reception and the launch of the book that came out of the previous conference. Maybe those who are with their windows closed would like to open the windows if they can. Of course, they are not expected to do so. Because Maria thought of inviting you to toast and to celebrate a bit this evening, even though unfortunately we will not be meeting we will not be meeting in person, but we will be meeting face to face.
Okay, so as you can see, this is our virtual reception. And we kindly ask you, those who came just now, to go and take a glass of whatever, a drink, and come back in a second. We will wait for you and then we will have a toast together. So please go and take yourself a drink and come back.
Are we all set with the drink, or is it too little time?
I think Paula still.
Mm-hmm.
And
here she is, Paula.
And the other ladies and gentlemen who are closed window, maybe they, and there is also the iPhone we spoke earlier. So maybe you could, we could see you and we could toast. And let's see if there are some more. Yes, they are coming some more. So do you have your drink? And as for reception, you have to make yourself a little.
So, as we say in Maltese, evviva!
Evviva!
Evviva! Evviva!
Yeah.
To the book, huh? It was a very big accomplishment as well.
So this was the nice part.
Yes. I'm wondering whether you want to say something about your experience so far. Hmm?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was the idea. I'm sorry, I got confused. It was the idea that you write in the private chat to the person on your left, no, on your right. So you look at someone and you should have someone on your right. And write in the chat, in the private chat to this person, one sentence about this day, about the day today.
So the person on our right or on our left? On our right, yeah. Okay. So I'm not seeing iPhone. That's the person next to me. But I'm not seeing it in the list. So sorry about that. I'm going to write it publicly.
I have three lovely messages, and I think something's not going right, but it's very nice for me.
I'm saying.
Okay. So you should, hopefully all of you received at least one message and sent at least one. Shall I continue, Angela?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so I will share my presentation again. Okay, so this is not only the virtual reception, but also a book launch. And I hope, let's see if all the colleagues who wrote in the book and wanted to attend, and also if Danius is here, not yet. Let's see, hopefully. So the book launch, I would like to start with telling that the book Carla Willig and myself, we edited, was actually the second in a row of publications from QRMH conference contributions. The first one was originally published as a special issue, and you can see it here. And it was edited by Del Löwenthal and Erinomi Avdi, and Erinomi is also participating in this conference this time. And so our book is, let's say, the second one in these contributions. And you can see here how it looks like, and Carla is also here with us. So you can welcome with us this book, which was edited in this year. And first of all, and I hope, I'm not sure if he is here, I wanted to start with the person who wrote the foreword to the book. Let's see, Angela, if you can you see somewhere?
I see a message in the one with the iPhone is saying the conference is amazingly vibrant. As for online, enjoying it very much. Thank you. We don't know the name of this person, but I'm not seeing. Maybe he is experiencing difficulties in connection.
Yes. So we can, maybe we just continue, and then I hope he will join us later.
Yeah,
okay.
Maybe you can make the overview of the book.
I will. Good. So just some words, some general ideas. Of course, the book has an introduction, and I don't want to go into depth in all what we developed there, but you see here the main aspects. I'm referring to all chapters, and tried to give an order in what more or less every chapter is dealing with. So this is what the very first, the introductory chapter is about. I will leave it like that. And the book structure is more or less how the main formats, you know, now, the individual presentations and the symposia. So that means that this book came out from the last QRMH conference in Berlin, and maintains the structure of individual presentations and symposia. All chapters refer to a concrete research question and present their respective results. The first part is dedicated to specific research studies, which are individual papers mirroring different levels of academic work, which is very interesting. So some originated in master thesis, others are conducted by PhD candidates, or some chapters are written by experienced academics. The second part, resulting from symposia, is even more interesting, and I find with regard to books on qualitative research, quite unique, that because they are resulting from symposia, you have collaborative approaches, be it cooperative research projects of researchers who are working on a certain topic in their respective home countries, or another group, they didn't work together beforehand, but they joined for a symposium because they were using similar research methods. So what we are going to see now is the part one, of course, only a selection of those. And let's see, we will start with Janice and Angela about your chapter, please.
Janice.
Hi, I'm Janice, and together with Professor Abela, we looked into psychiatrists' perceptions of schizophrenia and its recovery using thematic analysis. So the research question guiding the study asks if, in the local context, psychiatrists hold a purely medical view to schizophrenia and its recovery, or whether they hold a recovery-oriented perspective, or whether they lie somewhere in between. And most importantly, how this then impacts their clinical practice. The studies that we found were either carried out in the 90s, they were quantitative in nature, or they were based on psychiatric trainees rather than experienced psychiatrists. So we wanted to look at the psychiatrists' perceptions in more detail, and with the relatively recent shift towards a more recovery-oriented approach to mental health, we wanted to keep this context very much in mind. So when it comes to schizophrenia itself, our position was that it has both an objective and a subjective element to it. So together, these two kind of positions that we took outline our epistemological underpinnings, which are those of contextualism and critical realism. So from there, it followed that we would use the contextualist method of thematic analysis over an essentialist or realist one. By using thematic analysis, we were able to identify patterns across data sets, but we were also able to draw out the differences. Accordingly, themes were identified at a semantic level and in a deductive top-down manner based on the literature we had reviewed. So in terms of credibility, we made sure to state our positions at the outset of the dissertation and to present rich and detailed results so that the reader can draw his or her own conclusions about the data. Interpretations were peer-reviewed, and we continuously engaged in reflexivity. So in May of 2017, 6 psychiatrists who had between 0 and 5 years experience to over 10 years of experience, they were interviewed, and 4 overarching themes were identified. But to keep it brief, I will mention how the method that we used led us to elicit these 2 overarching themes. So, when it comes to psychiatrists' perception of schizophrenia itself, all psychiatrists in our study viewed schizophrenia as being predominantly biological in nature, which was picked up from narratives and use of words such as chronic brain disorder, illness, describing it as a set of symptoms and so forth. However, because the thematic analysis also accounts for the differences, we could also pick out that one psychiatrist in particular viewed schizophrenia as both being a biological disease and viewed it as an extension of normality as well, which for those of you who are familiar with the recovery model is an important part of that kind of position. So the psychiatrist had both views. So,
sorry.
Hi. So using qualitative methodology then makes it possible to capture the nuances which would otherwise have been missed in quantitative studies. Again, that schizophrenia seen by psychiatrists as a heterogeneous disorder has been reported in the literature before. However, the qualitative nature of the study made it possible for us to gain more insight into the frustration that this actually causes psychiatrists and how it leads them to prescribe medication. When it comes to the prognosis, so the second overarching theme, so when it comes to the prognosis of schizophrenia, all psychiatrists tended to view it as a likely chronic disorders with recurrent relapses. However, as opposed to the findings in the literature, the majority of participants were optimistic about the prospect of recovery in schizophrenia. Through the use of interviews, our participants had the time to articulate their thinking. So despite all participants having a medical view of schizophrenia, we found that those who focus more on the disease itself and viewed treatment more in terms of medication, as opposed to viewing the person as a whole and adopting a multidisciplinary approach to treatment, these psychiatrists tended to hold a more pessimistic view of recovery and tended to feel more hopeless when individuals with schizophrenia did not respond to medication. So this brings me to the limitations of the study. As the study is qualitative in nature, what I've just said cannot be generalized to the whole population of psychiatrists, so it is only a tentative. Also, thematic analysis did not allow us to retain a sense of continuity and contradiction within one individual. So something like IPA, for example, narrative analysis could have done. So we could not look at how past experiences shaped their current perceptions as rigorously as we could have done with other methodologies. And lastly, we couldn't make claims about power in discourse when it comes, for example, to power imbalances between psychiatrists and patients. So in that case, the discourse analysis would have been more suitable. That's all from my end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janice. This was very brief and how to say in a condensed way, your chapter. And the next is Jury with his team.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Yuri Krivtsov. I'm from Ghent University in Belgium, and I think that my supervisor, Raitske Mehang, is also here. So thank you also for the opportunity to participate in this book. It was a wonderful experience for us. And for me, it was the first paper that I could somehow publish for my PhD, which gave me also like some confidence that the area I'm studying makes a sense and is interesting for others. Yeah, so it was also a very pleasant review experience. What we did, we conducted actually a meta-synthesis of case studies, which is a relatively novel methodology. We gave this morning, we gave also a pre-conference workshop on meta-synthesis methodology, and a lot of thinking for this pre-conference workshop actually originated from this paper and from our conversation with Maria and Carla that I started to think, and I proposed it to Raitske, maybe we could incorporate it into our teaching with the idea to give one day a pre-conference workshop. So this resulted in an additional a course unit at Ghent University, and this resulted in this chapter. As concerning for the topic, I decided to make a very like a very reduced slide. It's actually the results section of our metasynthesis. We were interested in how therapists describe actually psychotherapy process in patients with medically unexplained symptoms. And what we attempted was a more theory building metasynthesis. So it goes a bit beyond just summarizing the themes that come up. And in case studies, it's also a bit hard to summarize themes because you often don't have a results section with themes or clusters of qualitative findings, but you should analyze and do more interpretation yourself. So this was, the result is something like a condensed gestalt or condensed timeline of a typical psychotherapy process, like typical within the 10 cases, of course, I have to say, but still some essence that we could discern of them. So these were published case studies from the single case archive, which was also developed at our department, but you can find them all over Web of Science and read them yourself. So our graphic presentation of the results was that like maybe to say some introductory words, the patients with medical unexplained symptoms are considered like hard to treat. Those there are also those who tend to go from doctor to doctor. And this is where our model starts, that before psychotherapy, you can actually see that they are stuck in sort of a vicious circle. So they experience more medical unexplained symptoms, and then they go to more medical interventions, which in turn may result in more symptoms because of iatrogenic harm, because of stress that is concerned with all these consultations, etc. And actually, we found in several case studies that the first intervention the therapist did was actually to break this vicious circle, to stop, to make the patient stop going to different practitioners. And the next thing, so this is this dotted line, which is actually the start of the psychotherapy. The next thing that they did was postponing interventions on conflict if there was some obvious conflict in patient's life. So they didn't confront them immediately with some inconsistencies or avoided feelings, etc. But they rather first strived to work on more deficit aspects of their functioning, like linking body and mind, so linking the somatic experience and arousal to some mental representations or expressions. Also, just to teach some more healthy coping style, so that they do more sports, etc. It's more from CBT cases, and only then they actually encouraged the patients to look into their conflicts, which could result in two different reactions. So we saw both increase and decrease of symptoms, and sometimes it was first increase and then decrease. So this blue line is actually the level of symptoms, of the strength of symptoms. There is no math behind it. It's just symbolic, but it is how a typical trajectory could have looked like. And this resulted in an evolution from physical pain to psychological pain. So what you see is this arrow beneath is this evolution from in the whole treatment. If a treatment was successful, first they talk a lot about their physical complaints, and then they actually focus, for example, their relationship problem. And then it has an interesting result that medical unexplained symptoms are not in the focus anymore. So in a few cases, it was even like therapists wanted to talk about pain, but the patients say, no, I want to talk about my wife, or things like that. So this is this kind of prototypical trajectory, which is of course an ideal type and a kind of ideal treatment that is condensed from these 10 cases. But we hope that this shows abilities that metasynthesis can provide for researchers and also for practitioners, because this can also serve as a template in, for example, educational settings for psychotherapists to discuss possible trajectories and what should not be missing, for example. What can we learn from successful cases? So this is my contribution.
Thank you very much.
Our contribution, actually. So it was me, my student Devi, and Raitske, who is also here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all, Yuri, and cheers. Okay, so Chapter 5, Carla.
Thank you. Yeah, just be very brief as well. So in this chapter, I'm really concerned with how pluralistic research can sort of evolve out of a process of the researcher being concerned with a particular phenomenon and asking different questions over time, some of these questions emerging from the previous round of questioning. So, and I'm using my own experience in the chapter of over the course of, how long is it now, over maybe 13 years, something like that, actually finding myself looking back, realizing that I've engaged in a pluralistic qualitative research program, which isn't something I had planned at the beginning. And this struck me as quite an interesting thing to reflect on. And this is what my chapter is about. So the chapter really describes the evolution of a pluralistic qualitative research program, in this case, into the experience of cancer-related distress. And the choice of the methods that I was using over the course of the time was always informed by the research question, focusing on different dimensions of the phenomenon. And it started off with an in-depth focus on one individual, and that's myself, one individual subjective experience. So this was an autoethnographic exploration, which really just emerged out of me keeping a diary in the process. Eventually cured, so I'm free of it now, but I didn't know that at the time. So the autoethnography really came out of a very personal struggle with an experience that I was finding difficult to make sense of. And then I continued to stick with the topic, and I focused on the socio-cultural situatedness of the experience. So I was then using discourse analysis and looking at the different ways in which cancer is constructed and the person with cancer is positioned within discourses and what consequences can arise from that positioning. Then I moved on to being interested in other people's experiences, and I moved on to phenomenology and conducted a study with two colleagues looking at accounts of the experience of living with cancer of a group of people that we interviewed. And then after that, I became interested in the bigger picture, and interestingly picking up on Yuri's presentation just now, the use of meta-synthesis to try and really integrate what other people had done, looking at the same question and trying to get a sense of perhaps what might be the defining features or the parameters of this experience within a particular cultural context. That, you know, and so I then realized that actually I'd ended up with what could be described as a research program, and I found that quite interesting, especially since each of the questions was really emerging from the previous round of research. And I realized how interesting it is really to reflect on one's own journey in terms of questioning about a phenomenon and looking back, you know, understanding the journey better than actually during it or at the beginning of it. So that's what the chapter describes, really.
Thank you very much, Carla. Okay, so then we move to the second part. And as I mentioned, these chapters in the second part of the book are collaborative approaches. And chapter 6 is written by Juliana Celinor, and you see here all the contributors. Maybe Juliana, you can tell yourself who contributed and speak a little bit about your chapter.
Yes, of course. So this chapter, the symposium, which we presented in Berlin, it was the work really of the three supervisees that I was working with at the time, Rebecca, Nabuli Ododani, and Helena. And they were all at that time counselling psychology trainees writing their doctoral research. They are all qualified now, qualified practitioners and counselling psychologists. And what we realised when we decided we'd like to present these pieces of work at Berlin at the conference was that they were all connected, not just because they all use discourse analytic methods, a variety of discourse analytic methods, which I can talk about a little bit more in a moment. But what they all did was they all identified things that were being not talked about by the groups who held power in each of these situations, but were nevertheless present or relevant in the talk of the people who the power was being held over. So if I give you some examples of this, in Rebecca's study, she looked at, or she worked with participants who were members of a voice hearing group. So they self-identified as voice hearing, and they talked about their constructions of their voices and how they constructed themselves and how they constructed their voices and their experience of being voice hearers. And that compared with the literature, the discourses that were available in the psychiatric and the psychological and the medical literature were very different, in that what wasn't spoken about in those psychiatric and medical and psychological literatures was that there was this very wide way of experiencing voices that weren't necessarily pathologically constructed by the voice hearers themselves. They didn't see themselves as suffering from a disease as they were perhaps being constructed by some of the literature. So that's an example of what we mean when we talk about what isn't being said. Similarly, Helena's piece of work was with mothers about childbirth. And when Helena looked at the literature from midwifery, from obstetrics, basically the medical literature, again, what was absent was what the mothers then went on to talk about, which was this messy, visceral, frightening experience sometimes, not for everyone, but there's a much wider range of experience that was talked about by the mothers themselves than was being found in again these sort of dominant discourses. And then finally, Nabuli's work was with employment mentors or coaches who had been employed themselves to work with people who are unemployed, long-term unemployed, to try and get people back into work. And what was fascinating in the discourses of these mentors, of these coaches, they were very passionate about their work and they were very caring towards their clients. But there was no mention of psychological distress and any kind of distress that might result or might be involved in their clients' lack of work or inability to work. So there was this sort of big hole in the middle of their talk that we felt was very striking. So that's what we tried to do in our symposium, was to present these three pieces of research, which are in the chapter. There's a section on each of them if you'd like to. I hope you'll read more about them. But we also then wanted to think methodologically, and this is where Jenny came in with all her expertise on discourse analysis as a method, and she helped us to shape this in a way where we were able to think about this sort of methodological advantage of using discourse analysis, not just to talk about what is there in the text, but also what is glaringly obvious by not being there, and what that then means for what can be thought and felt and done by people who are subject to these power relationships. So we used different kinds of discourse analysis in each study. They all had similarities, but Rebecca's was a critical discourse analysis. Nabuli's was a Foucauldian discourse analysis, and Helena's was also Foucauldian, but she brought in a visual element where she also looked at Instagram images of mothers who'd posted on Instagram. And she did a study as well, in addition to her textual analysis of what was being, what discourses were present in these visual images on Instagram. So what we hope is that what the chapter does is it not only gives an example of 3 different ways of doing discourse analysis as applied to a really wide range of topics, but also gives a sense of this idea of what is unspoken or what might have been considered to be extra discursive, this problem that discourse analysis might be thought to have had of what do you do with the stuff that isn't talked about, but that we argue in our chapter that you can actually think discursively about what's not there as well as what is.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Thank you. Okay, so these colleagues couldn't come, so I just show you the slide. It's from a group in Germany. They are focusing on the power issue, the power of definition, especially on persons' mental health at risk. And chapter 8 is actually Bernadetta Janus and myself. And this this chapter is about the stimulated recall interview, or interpersonal process recall, how you call it as well. And tomorrow morning there's going to be a symposium on the relational mind project, where my part is situated in, and Bernadetta Janus' part is conducted in Krakow in Poland, and we tried to make sense jointly of the material. That means this interview technique is a special technique to where participants of a certain session, here there are the therapists of a couple therapies, they watch pieces of the original couple therapy, and then they reflect or tell about what they remember of happening in the session, or telling something about the therapy they conducted beforehand. So they comment. And this kind of reviewing a therapy session is a social practice in itself, of course, because the interviewer is asking the question about what do you remember what happened in this therapy session, or how did you feel, etc. So this is a social practice in itself, and it is also a kind of storytelling, because the people who are looking at the therapy session, they tell smaller or longer narratives about what happened in this session from their point of view, and why they have chosen, for example, this intervention and not another one. And they display also professional and personal identities by doing that. So they explain why the therapists, why they did behave in this way and not, for example, in another one. And this is what the chapter is about. Both projects are using this interview technique, or interview method, and we use the dialogical approach to make sense what this material is about. And if you would like to know more about this, join tomorrow the Relational Mind Symposium. So now we have chapter 10. This is Sarah.
Okay, hello everyone. So yes, our chapter is one of those based on a symposia and a project that was already ongoing when we signed up for the conference, and it's our symposium is part of the research project Engraved in the Body, or actually Engraved in the Memories, Ways of Reading Finnish People's Memories of Mental Hospitals. And the motivation was to explore the cultural and historical significance, as well as spatial and embodied aspects of experiences of mental hospitals, and the possibilities of narrating them and present different ways of reading them. So our research project is based on a collection of writings that were collected together with the Finnish Literature Society in their archives in response to a request for writings. And we received 92 pieces of writing by patients. Patients were the biggest group of writers, and as well as relatives, staff, and employees, children. And the memories range from 1930s to 2010, so quite recently. And the data collection took place in 2014 and 15. So it took over a year to collect the writings. And then based on this, we designed this research project, a multidisciplinary one, where the people involved, myself, have a background in language and literature studies and cultural studies. We also have here Sari Kuuva, who's a visual scholar and art historian, and he also has background in cognitive science. And Kirsi Heimonen, who is an artist researcher, and her film that was based on these writings was presented today. And we also had, as part of our research group, historian in psychiatry, Anu Rissanen, who unfortunately is not here, and poetry therapist, Karoliina Maanmieli. And as a starting point to our research, we had this notion of mental hospitals as lived spaces. And we wanted to explore the kind of spatial and embodied experiences that the writers had. And in the article, we present different approaches and frameworks to the shared material. So each of us, from drawing from our own disciplinary backgrounds, were reading the memories in different ways. I wrote about the data collection and the importance also of collecting these memories in the archives as a kind of gesture of appreciating the memories and preserving them as a part of a kind of cultural heritage of Finland. And Anu wrote about the history of psychiatry in Finland, which is very institutional based. And in the 70s, we had one of the highest number of sick beds in psychiatric hospitals. So it's actually really relevant part of our cultural history that the mental hospitals that we have in still have in almost every village, and the hospitals are now being transformed into different kinds of spaces like hotels and apartments. But Anu kind of constructed the historical background for the memories that cover a really broad time frame. Karoliina explored the metaphors or figures of speech, and especially those related to trauma. And she's also studied the violence that took place in coercive practices in that hospital, and that still take place. So one of the continuities in the memories was that there is this continuation of coercion in psychiatry. And then Kirsi, the artistic researcher, she approached the memories through a somatic movement method, because Skinner's release technique, which is a kind of embodied way of reading and interpreting the memories. And as part of the project, she has also moved and danced the memories in also in conferences, and which has a peculiar and really effective impact also on the audiences. And then Sari Kuuva explored one of the group of writers whose presence kind of surprised us also, because we received a number of writings by people who had grown up in the premises of psychiatric or mental hospitals because their parents work there. And Sari has explored their use and experience of space in the hospital, so providing a kind of other alternative perspective to the practices and daily lives of the hospitals. And in our discussion, basically, we wanted to draw attention to the body and effects and emotions and spaces related to psychiatric care, and how they can, these perspectives can help perhaps generate new practices, new research questions, and ways of engaging the public in the results of academic research. And yeah, that's basically what we try to do. And also one of our arguments was that since these memories that often are not talked about prevail in society and are part of people's collective or individual memory, they also affect the ways in which people perceive psychiatric institutions and then relate to psychiatric care, and especially hospitalization, which still seems to be the most stigmatizing experience related to psychiatric practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. Okay, so Carla, it's your turn again about the conclusion.
I think Carla left.
Oh, Carla. Okay.
Yeah, I just lost connection. My internet connection is a bit unstable, so I may disappear, but I've just come back in. So
we can hear you.
It will last. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, good. Okay, so chapter 11, yeah, this is the conclusion, and I mean, there's a lot in there, but I just wanted to focus here on the part where we kind of try and make sense of the sheer diversity and scope of the research projects included in the book. And so we're sort of firstly acknowledging, you know, how many different methods there are that are being used, and kind of putting them into categories, broadly speaking, to get a sense of the different types of approaches that are represented. And they include a theme-focused analysis, and that would be grounded theory, thematic analysis, and the metasynthesis. Then there was quite a lot of textual analysis, including discourse analysis, linguistic interactional analysis, and emotional textual analysis. Again, I want to add that for me as co-editor, it's really, really rewarding experience because I've learned about methods I didn't know about. And I think this is something really important to kind of remember, that there'll always be methods that you know we don't know, and new methods are coming through. And it's just so important to share this knowledge, this information, so other people can pick up and use them as well. So for that reason as well, the book is really important. So I've learned a lot. Next category was the reflexive methods. These included autoethnography, interpersonal process recall, corporal attunement, ontology, which was part of the last project just presented earlier. And then finally, experiential methods, and these would be phenomenological approaches. So quite different approaches. And we can also say that the studies addressed quite different types of research questions. And each of these categories of types of research question kind of are informed by different epistemological orientation. And so again, I've just identified them here briefly. So the first type of question, what is out there, what is going on? This would be a more realist position. Then secondly, questions about what is it like for someone to experience something? What does it mean to them? More phenomenological. Thirdly, how is an experience or phenomenon constructed through language? These would be the discursive approaches. And then finally, what lies behind that which presents itself? And here are kind of...
We lost her.
Yes, maybe hopefully she come back. Yes, and you see the other types of research questions. So, and also in this final chapter, there is a kind of diagram where all these approaches are connected and shown. And maybe, I hope she will come back in a second. Carla, can you hear us?
Yeah, I think I'm back. Yes, I'm back, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for staying in.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I think the final point is just that despite all the differences, what we wanted to emphasize is that all of the study in their different ways are trying to increase our understanding of the social and psychological processes that underpin and mediate mental health and well-being.
Yes.
So they all aim at the same thing, but in lots of different ways. Yeah.
Yes. So this is it. And before we pass the word to Jarel, who is going to have a reflective voice, I want to thank you, Carla, for this collaboration. It took us a while, honestly, and it was quite an amount of work as well. I think we can say that. And the results, you see, these are some extracts, some selection of the chapters. But I think it was really worth it, and I'm so glad that we did it. And thank you for this experience with you. Yes, cheers.
Cheers.
Okay, so let's go now to Jarel.
Thank you. Maria, I would like to share
yes,
my
I will
screen.
stop here. And you can now share your.
Mm-hmm. Wait a minute.
We can see it.
You can see it.
Yeah.
Good. Yes, thank you, Maria and Carla, for asking me first to write a review of the book, and then asked me to say something about the book here at this event. I didn't understand what kind of a challenge it was when I agreed to do it, but as you can understand, you have been listening now to this presentation, that it's an amazing book, and it's an impressive book. And it's quite a challenge to appropriate everything that is here. So when reading the book and trying to somehow digest it, it brought to my mind an analogy to a Scandinavian smorgasbord. And I'm just going to present my view of the book as a Scandinavian smorgasbord, saying something for those who will read the book, what they can learn from the book and how they can manage, so to speak, how they can survive the book if you want to digest the book. It's important to understand when we talk about Scandinavian smorgasbords that it's a standing table, so it's called. It's like a buffet, but it's not a buffet. It's something very much more than a buffet. And I think, in contrast to a buffet, where you can pile food on one single plate in a random order, and alas, often you do it in excess. In a Scandinavian smorgasbord, it consists of very specific dishes, and they are laid out in a very specific order. And it should be enjoyed, the smorgasbord, with much time and with respect for the rich variety and tastes and qualities of the dishes served. And I think this book should be read in the same way. So when you read a smorgasbord, you should take one round at a time. And you should also remember to change plates between the rounds so that you don't mix the tastes, but to enjoy all the tastes. So in the following now, I give my subjective suggestion on how to enjoy this book as a smorgasbord. And of course, everybody has to make his or her own smorgasbord, I think, of the book, but this is my selection. So when you eat a smorgasbord, you start with a variety of pickled herring. And for me, in this book, the pickled herring could be the chapter on case studies and metasynthesis. You eat the herrings because they waken up your taste buds. And I think in this book, perhaps this chapter is the one that wakes up your taste of the variety of and the basic ideas of case studies, and then metasynthesis and piling together findings from different studies is appropriate to think about the herring of this book. Then you go in a smorgasbord to fish and seafood dishes, and many people think that this is the most delicious part of the smorgasbord. And I think Carla's chapter could be the fish and seafood dishes part of this book. It's so rich. It's an amazing chapter. It's so rich with varieties, and still they all go together, and they combine the subjective individual experience then to collective means of meaning making and so on. And then comes the cold meats and the pâté in the smorgasbord. And for me, it could be the two chapters that deal with reflexive practices. The two chapters that say something about how meaning making happens and how professionals and researchers should be reflective upon the way they participate in the social meaning-making processes. What comes then? Of course, the warm meats and the warm sides. And here we come to the heavy stuff, things that have to do with difficult psychiatric disorders, the life of people who are connected in different ways to this kind of very painful experiences. And the rich, I mean, you have warm meats and you have warm sides and you have sauces and the rich variety of connections between individual experiences and all kind of social constructions around them. And then we come to the cheese selection. And I think for me, a very rare, very delicious piece of cheese and a new acquaintance for me was emotional textual analysis, as is described in this chapter. And then we come to the dessert and coffee, and the more light side of the table. And what could be more lighter and pleasant than to have walks together with your interviews, your participants, and to start to share meanings and together to get more and more understandings of what it is to be in the kind of life situations that those people have been, and using this walking as a way of getting the dialogue alive. But is there something missing? Yes.
The liqueur.
You have stuff that you serve alongside, rye bread, crusty bread, and cheese. And for me, being also a person doing discourse analysis, I think this chapter, which is so interesting because it says that discourse analysis, the different kinds of discourse analysis can not only be used to investigate talking, but also to investigate non-talking. And I think that was for me a very fine new idea. So enjoy, read the book, but take time, enough of time, and don't try to do it all in one session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jarl. This is beautiful. Thank you very much. So it's really, you see, we have our welcome reception.
Yes. Now you have something to eat also.
Yes, we even have to eat. Thank you.
We take the opportunity, first of all, to congratulate Maria and Carla and all the authors for this wonderful mammoth piece of work, I would say, with all its complexities. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. You must all be very tired and hungry, and we leave you here. Bye-bye. And
so I would like to thank all authors and thank you. Oops, I'm sorry, this one. And see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Angela.
Well done.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Carla.